Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. We've got a terrific program for you today, and we want to lead off with the fact that the president is going to talk to Congress. And the question is, will the Democrats turn their backs? If they hoot, they'll get thrown out of the chamber because that's against the rules. But will they respect the President of the United States, or is this partisanship going to be rancorous tonight as he addresses the nation? He's going to lay out an agenda that issues like tax cuts in the economy, rebuilding America's defenses, and cutting government spending. Here's Wendy.
The president will need help from Congress to get his plans passed into law, and Republican leaders say they're on board. Jennifer Wishon brings us the story from the White House.
For President Donald Trump, big rallies are the wind in his sails. At his first address to a joint session of Congress, he'll have a grand stage. But the crowd can be tough. Instead of his rough say-anything rhetoric, look for the president to strike a tone of unity and renewal. Senior White House officials say he wants the American people to know help is on the way and that he's at work addressing real problems facing real Americans. The president is already making his goals clear.
We're going to do more with less and make the government lean and accountable to the people. We can do so much more with the money we spend.
He'll focus his speech on creating economic opportunity through reducing regulations that weigh down businesses and lowering taxes on both companies and individuals. He'll also dedicate time to explaining how he'll enhance national security, a promise punctuated by the budget he'll soon release to Congress.
This budget will be a public safety and national security budget.
In a budget outline released ahead of his speech, Trump proposes boosting the U.S. defense budget by $54 billion. That's a 10% boost.
We must ensure that our courageous servicemen and women have the tools they need to deter war, and when called upon to fight in our name, only do one thing: win. We have to win. We have to start winning wars again.
The president's budget is merely a guide. Ultimately, all spending decisions are left up to Congress. But it shows Americans he's willing to back up his promises with dollars and cents.
We are taking his words and turning them into policies and dollars.
He'll have to convince Democrats to work with him, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the Trump agenda is exactly the same as the Republican agenda.
I think for virtually all Republicans, the chance to actually do things that we thought would move the country in the right direction and have the president sign them into law is a pretty exciting prospect.
The president isn't expected to touch entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, which may eventually put him at odds with some GOP lawmakers. For the moment, investors are looking for details, assurances the president will make good on his promises that have led to the Trump bump on Wall Street. However, don't expect many details about tax relief right away, although the administration does hope to pass its tax reform package by August. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, the White House.
Well, you know, as a piece of the GDP, actually, the percentage of going to defense is still relatively low. It sounds like a tremendous amount of money, but he's increasing by about $54 billion. But when you look at the gross domestic product of America, which is enormous, the percentage being spent on defense is still quite low. When you figure John Kennedy took about 10% or more in his budget, we're not even close to that now, maybe 3 or 4% of the GDP. And so there's room to grow, but this is a good bite. It's going to take a few years to get the defense to where it needs to be. Because, you know, they don't have enough planes to fly to practice. They don't have enough gasoline to put in the planes. They don't have enough ammunition. The planes are old, and they've got to renew them. I mean, it's a big challenge, but he's going to work on it. Well, President Trump's plan to increase defense spending comes as the U.S. is facing several deadly threats around the world, from the Middle East to Asia. Our John Jessup has that.
And Pat, among those threats, the growing nuclear programs in North Korea and Iran, and the brutal terrorism of ISIS. George Thomas has that story.
In the Middle East, ISIS continues on its path of death and destruction. The president says defeating the group and keeping Americans safe at home and abroad is a top priority.
The Department of Defense presented its preliminary plan to the White House today to defeat ISIS. This plan has been delivered by Secretary Mattis, and who is currently briefing the principals on the option presented today and seeking their input and feedback.
Over the weekend, a 1,300-foot giant sinkhole was discovered in the Iraqi desert, believed to be the site where ISIS shot, then dumped up to 4,000 bodies. Most of the victims killed execution style, with their hands bound and their eyes blindfolded. Also, ISIS is reportedly using puppies as suicide bombers. Video has emerged allegedly showing ISIS fighters strapping an explosive belt to this puppy and planning to remotely detonate the device. Fortunately, Iraqi forces were able to rescue the dog and defuse the bomb. Meanwhile, west of Iraq, Iran's influence continues to grow in the region. Almost 2 years after signing a deal to curb its nuclear ambitions, the Ayatollahs, flush with billions of dollars from the agreement, are still testing their missiles and exporting their terror tactics.
For too long, Iran has been funneling weapons and cash to their terrorist minions in places like Lebanon, Syria, and the Gaza Strip. They've gone to great lengths to develop nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles, and due to the disastrous end of the nuclear-related sanctions under Iran, they now have even more resources to devote to these efforts.
And there's also the nuclear threat from another rogue regime, North Korea. Experts like James Woosley, former director of the CIA, warn that it's perilous to underestimate the communist country's atomic arsenal. 2 weeks after the North conducted a ballistic missile test, Woosley believes the country's weapons are likely more advanced and dangerous. Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis recently warned North Korea that America's commitment to defending her allies in the region is ironclad.
Any attack on the United States or on our allies will be defeated, and any use of nuclear weapons would be met with a response that would be effective and overwhelming.
The U.S. faces potential threats from countries like China and Russia as well. These and other hotspots make for a chaotic, dangerous landscape around the world as Trump begins his presidency. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. Pat, as George just pointed out, so much going on around the world.
Well, this thing in Korea is very serious. We should be absolutely prepared to shoot down any missile, anything they launch. We ought to be able to shoot it down, and we should have in place whatever is necessary. The thing that we must be concerned about, and I don't see this in this budget, is the hardening of our grid against what's called an EMP, an electronic magnetic pulse. How does it come about? All you'd need to do, and it's very simple, launch one missile over the pole from Korea around the middle part of America, like over Chicago, and detonate one nuclear bomb. That's all it would take to send out a pulse throughout this nation that would literally cripple our grid and our electronics and all of the trading of stock and in the thing that you might use to get your money, whatever that happens to be, and all the other electronic devices that we have in our society would come to a screeching halt. We wouldn't have electric power. It would be horrible. So a few $1 billion, not much, would be all it would take to harden those sites and to harden our grid. We need to do that. I don't think that's in this budget, but I sure hope and pray it is. But now, what General Mattis said, overwhelming, I think we've got to deal with North Korea sooner or later, and it may be we need force against them sooner than later, but we'll have to remain cautiously optimistic. John.
Pat, 2 people are heading where few have gone before, to the moon. Aerospace manufacturing company SpaceX says it will fly the unnamed pair to the moon next year, something that hasn't been done since NASA's last Apollo flight in December of 1972. Tech billionaire Elon Musk said the 2 people had approached his company about sending them on a week-long flight just beyond the moon. Musk says the mission will happen toward the end of next year using a Dragon crew capsule and a Falcon Heavy rocket. If everything goes according to plan, it could happen close to the 50th anniversary of NASA's first manned flight to the moon on Apollo 8. And Pat, that was back in December of 1968.
Well, that's an exciting thing. I'm not sure I would want to be one of those volunteers for that. And I certainly wouldn't want to spend whatever, $20 million or $50 million or whatever it costs to go up there. That's a Whew, how would you like to do that, Wendy?
Not at all. But they want to go beyond the moon. I mean,
Yeah,
it seems like the moon would be sufficient.
Well, at least you can do. I mean, travel around it. Maybe they're going to circumvent the moon. Whatever. But you know, Houston, we've got a problem. I can see it now. Something just went wrong, and we're going to be up here for the rest of time.
Some people have too much time on their hands. They're just bored.